wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic Podcast. My name is Steve, coming to you from Central Ohio, and I'm joined today by
Dan of Queens, New York City.
This is the podcast where we apply ancient philosophy to modern life, and this week we are talking about Diogenes. Dan, would you like to introduce us to this interesting and influential character?
We will start out with a brief summary of the life of Diogenes, and then we will explore some of our favorite Diogenes anecdotes. So the main sources I used for this was Lives of the Eminent Philosophers by Diogenes Laertius, and I also read a book entitled Diogenes, The Rebellious Life and Revolutionary Philosophy of the Original Cynic by Inger Kuhn, which came out in 2025. I read this book to deepen my understanding of Diogenes, but it is not public domain, so I will not be quoting from it. I do, however, highly recommend the book. It's very good. Diogenes the Dog, as he's known, is relevant to Stoicism because he is an intellectual ancestor of Stoicism. And some of the most important Stoic concepts come to Stoicism through Diogenes. For example, living according to nature, virtue is the only good, and cosmopolitanism. Stoicism is a Socratic school, meaning that in their view, they were carrying on and developing the philosophical project started by Socrates. The way the Stoics derived that intellectual lineage is through the Cynics. So first you had Socrates, who lived approximately 470 BCE to 399 BCE. Prior to Socrates, philosophers primarily concerned themselves with things like mathematics and natural philosophy, what we would call natural science today. It was Socrates that first emphasized philosophy as a way of examining our character, cultivating virtue, and showing how to lead a flourishing life. And he had a number of followers, and among them was a fellow named Antisthenes. Like Socrates, he led a simple life. Antisthenes did take his living simply seriously. He had a humble home, for example, but he did not take it to the extreme that his mentee Diogenes eventually would. Diogenes of Sinope, also known as Diogenes the Dog. One of Diogenes' followers was Crates of Thebes. And Crates of Thebes, in turn, was the primary mentor of Zeno of Citium, who is the founder of Stoicism. Like many ancient figures, it's hard to pin down exact dates of birth and death for Diogenes, but he was born somewhere in the neighborhood of 410 BCE and died somewhere near 320 BCE. He was born in Sinope, which is a Greek city on the Black Sea, and what is now the northern coast of Turkey. Sinope was in Paphlagonia, right on the border of the Greek and Persian worlds, and it was heavily influenced by both and was a major trading city. Diogenes was the son of one of the elites of Sinope. His father was a banker, a money changer, and was in charge of the mint of Sinope. And at some point, there was a scandal that involved funny business with the coinage of Sinope, and either Diogenes or his father or both were implicated, and as a result, Diogenes was banished from Sinope. At some point after his banishment, Diogenes found himself in Athens, where he became the mentee of the philosopher Antisthenes. Later, for a reason that's never made clear, Diogenes went on a sea voyage, and while at sea, he was captured by pirates and sold into slavery. He was sold to a wealthy man from Corinth named Xeniades. Eventually, either his Corinthian master freed Diogenes, or he allowed him significant freedom because Diogenes took up living at the edge of a forest near Corinth, which is where Diogenes had his famous meeting with Alexander, which we will discuss further later. There are differing accounts of his manner of death, but they all agree that Diogenes was quite old. He died around the age of 90. One thing Diogenes was famous for, as an example of his simple living, Diogenes chose to live in a large earthenware cask called a pithos, turned on its side. Pithoi could be quite large and were used primarily for the storage of grains and liquids like wine and olive oil. We don't use pithoi today, so when it's translated, they often use barrel or urn or some other term that doesn't quite capture what a pithos was. But if you do a Google image search, For Diogenes, a lot of times you'll see him sitting beside his Pythos, and then you have a strong idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So Diogenes, I guess early on, was talking to his soon to be mentor. How do you say that again? You're better at it than he. Antisthenes, is that correct?
That's as close as I can get.
And he wanted to study under Antisthenes, and Antisthenes refused to teach him. And Diogenes just kept hounding on the guy, out of just use sheer persistence on the guy. And Antisthenes even once pulled out a staff and said, "I'm going to hit you with this if you don't back off." And Diogenes said, "Strike, for you will find no wood hard enough to keep me away from you as long as I think you've something to say."
And from then on, Antisthenes accepted Diogenes as
Yeah.
his mentee, I believe.
Yeah.
Antisthenes he had a reputation for not wanting followers. He liked to discuss philosophy in the same way that Socrates did, but he didn't want to be responsible for people following him around and viewing him as their mentor. But I guess Diogenes got the better of him.
He wore him down and impressed him by saying, beat me if you want, but if you've got something to say, I'm still going to show up and listen. So you'll see that Diogenes has a very strong will and independent streak, as it were. He got the idea of living simply by watching a mouse run around, essentially. He doesn't need a nice bed. He's not afraid of the dark. He's not going around trying to make money or impress anyone. It's like, hey, that mouse can adapt to whatever circumstance that it's faced with, essentially, and it's fine. If a mouse can live that way, why couldn't a rational human being live that way? And so he went down this path of simplicity, which led to him sleeping in that earthenware vessel, basically outside. It led to him rolling in sand, and Dan may talk about this more later, I'm not sure, but embracing cold statues in the winter.
That was part of his efforts to inure himself to heat and cold.
And then it got to the point, too, where all he really owned was the clothes he was wearing and a clay cup. And then one day he saw...
He also had a pouch that he kept his food in.
Of course, his carrying satchel for his cup. And one day he saw a young boy drinking using his hands as a cup. And he said, "This child has beaten me in simplicity," essentially. And he threw away his cup immediately because he saw that it was also unnecessary.
He dashed it to pieces.
Take that, cup. What are some of your favorite?
I really like the fact that he was such a thorn in the side of Plato. They couldn't be more different, even though they both considered themselves to be the intellectual descendants of Socrates. Plato was wealthy, founded the academy, he wrote a lot of books, he had a lot of students, and he strove toward ever greater understanding of the abstract and the divine, whereas Diogenes was basically homeless. He lived in the marketplace, he had no formal students, and he was very dismissive of abstract ruminations. Diogenes was concerned with how to live a good life in the physical world and in the present, not with any theories of forms and such. And he constantly clashed with Plato whenever he had an opportunity. For all his shamelessness, Diogenes did seem to care about spreading his conception of how to live a good life. He did want notoriety.
Yeah.
So him clashing with the number one philosopher in the area and making a nuisance of himself was a great way to raise his public profile, I think. The way that the academy would arrive at philosophical conclusions was through strenuous and lengthy debates. And one of the things they came up with through these lengthy debates was that a man is a featherless biped. So Diogenes heard about this, so he went and he found himself a rooster and he plucked it. And he went into the academy and he hurled it at Plato and said, "Behold, Plato's man."
And then the Plato school is like, "Oh, damn it, Diogenes." And then they're like, "I guess we do need to amend our definition because that is a featherless biped."
Right, and then they amended it to be featherless biped with broad nails.
Which is pretty funny. Oh, well, that's not a human. It's got little claws. It doesn't have broad toenails.
Yeah, that's a good example of a conflict that would undoubtedly cause all sorts of chatter and excitement around town. That one of the main philosophers is tossing a plucked rooster at the other one.
Right. Yeah, it's not the boring boring let us discuss what a human is or blah blah blah. Diogenes is like, to heck with that. I'm gonna throw a plucked chicken at you. Behold.
One thing that Diogenes would never let Plato forget was that he was a sellout in the eyes of Diogenes because he would go and take money from wealthy patrons. And one of them was King Dionysius of Syracuse. At one point, Plato was hosting some members of the court of King Dionysius. Diogenes entered and he trampled his feet all over Plato's nice carpets while exclaiming, "I trample upon Plato's vainglory." To which Plato responded, "How much pride you expose to view, Diogenes, by seeming not to be proud."
Oh no, he didn't.
He did, snap.
This is perhaps my favorite anecdote about interactions between Plato and Diogenes. Plato saw Diogenes washing lettuces, approached him and said, "Had you paid court to King Dionysius, you would not now be washing lettuces." Diogenes in a calm voice responded, "If you had washed lettuces, you wouldn't have paid court to Dionysius." Diogenes was pointing out that our desire for externals like wealth and proximity to power enslaves us, and that the path to freedom is not in having more, but in desiring less. In the discourses of Epictetus, you can find similar expressions admonishing his students that desire for externals is the path to slavery, because anyone who controls what you desire can control you. Whereas, if you desire only virtue, nobody can control you, because virtue comes from within and is up to us. In her book on Diogenes, Inger Kuhn referenced an anecdote about Diogenes from the Cynic philosopher Telles. I adapted the following from a public domain version of Telles. Diogenes encountered a man who complained loudly that Athens had become an expensive city. Diogenes took him to the marketplace and went from stall to stall, asking the prices of perfume, meat, and soft wool. Upon hearing the prices quoted by the sellers, Diogenes would agree with his interlocutor and exclaimed, "The city is indeed expensive." Then they went to another part of the market and inquired the price of products like beans and dried figs. Upon hearing the prices quoted being a copper or two, Diogenes exclaimed, "The city is indeed inexpensive." So too with circumstances. If one uses them in one way, they appear trouble-free and easy, but if he uses them in another way, they appear difficult. The interlocutor of Diogenes perceived Athens to be an expensive place, because he desired the luxury goods on offer in the market. However, for Diogenes and the other more humble inhabitants of Athens, the city was affordable, because they bought simpler fare. Once again, Diogenes is pointing to the curbing of desire as the path to freedom.
Of course, the very famous encounter. So Diogenes of Sinope is hanging out, just chilling.
Well, the way it's normally depicted, he's sitting adjacent to his Pythos outside Corinth.
Yeah, and Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world, essentially, the Western world, shows up, and he's heard about Diogenes, and he's impressed with his teachings and his notions of simple living, and Alexander walks up to him and basically says, "Diogenes, ask me anything you wish, and I'll give it to you." And Diogenes says, "Could you step to the side a bit? You're blocking the sun, buddy. You're standing in my light." And and Alexander is just amazed because he's used to people trying to kiss his butt all day long and begging him for things. And Diogenes just says, "Stop it, kid! You bother me." When when asked what he could do for him, so he says, "If I had not been Alexander, I should like to have been Diogenes."
I think it's because he recognized that Diogenes was completely free and
Yeah.
he was not afraid of him no matter how powerful he was,
Yeah.
and that he could not get him under his thumb. Because if Diogenes had accepted his offer of a boon and asked for wealth or power or some other worldly request, then he would have been obligated to Alexander, and
Sure.
that would have impeded on his freedom. But
So,
instead, he didn't play that game. He said, just move out of my light.
yeah, just remember that he who wants nothing has everything, right? uh,
Everything he wants, anyway.
yeah. Yeah. So he doesn't need anything else, and he's not scared of death, and he's not scared of you. So just get out of my light. At some point in his life, he was sold into slavery after being captured by pirates. And when they asked him what good he could be, he says that he could govern men. And when they were trying to sell him into slavery, he told the crier, the guy that would basically be like the auctioneer, saying, "Here we got a guy for sale. Who wants this guy? He can mop floors, he can build a ship or whatever." He said, "Tell them that anyone who wants to purchase a master for himself should buy me."
And then Xeniades bought him, and apparently he did pretty much run that household for as long as he lived there. And he also was in charge of tutoring and raising the man's two sons. And
Yeah.
they basically became proto Cynics.
Yeah, he basically told Xeniades, like, listen, if you had bought a doctor and you were sick, you would obey the doctor. You should obey me in terms of how to live because I'm an expert on that. And so he got put in charge of a lot of the aspects of running the household. So he kind of got what he wanted. He was bold and and very confident in himself. But he would, walk around and chastise people. They called him the dog because he slept, in the streets. He would defecate in the streets.
Well, it was Plato that reportedly gave him that nickname
Yeah.
because of that behavior, but also because he just wanted to insult him, and basically you know
Like
how
a
it is when
barking
you try
dog.
to say he's a dog.
Yeah.
And of course, the shamelessness of Diogenes would not be defeated, so he just adopted it for himself and just started calling himself Diogenes the
Like,
Dog.
cool, I'll take it.
Diogenes is frequently credited with most clearly developing the idea of cosmopolitanism as it comes down to the Stoics. And that's because when people would ask Diogenes, where are you from? Because remember, his whole adult life, pretty much, he was somewhere other than where he was born. He was in Athens and then Corinth and wherever else, but he was never in his hometown of Sinope. In the Greek city states, if you weren't in your hometown, you weren't allowed most of the time to buy property, and you couldn't buy that. I know for a fact you couldn't do that in Athens. And you also weren't allowed to participate in political life. So you were kind of an outsider no matter how long you spent in that city. So at one point, someone asked Diogenes, where are you from? And Diogenes responded, I am a cosmopolites, which means a citizen of the world. Another quote about Diogenes: Diogenes would ridicule high birth, fame, and all such distinctions, calling them showy ornaments of vice. The only true commonwealth is that which is as wide as the universe. Diogenes Laertius, section 72 of Diogenes of Sinope.
So here's this guy. He's trying to live as simply as possible. He likes to call out others about their hypocrisy. He's not scared of power. He doesn't want anything. He'll take, food and things, but he doesn't need anything from anyone. He's not beholden to anyone. And he's often depicted as walking around even in the daylight with a lantern. If you look up statues or paintings of Diogenes, he's often holding a lamp because he's searching for a man, or sometimes it's like an honest man. And there's one anecdote where he's standing in a crowd and he starts yelling for men, like, I'm looking for men, and people gather around and he yells scoundrel. He goes, I said I wanted men, you're all scoundrels, because no one met his standard, right? He had a very strict standard of what a man was, and I have a feeling that he was the only man he'd ever met.
The way that he expressed it sometimes was that he viewed himself to be a chorus leader. And there's a quote from Diogenes Laertius about this. Diogenes used to say that he followed the example of the trainers of choruses, for they too set the note a little high, to ensure that the rest should hit the right note. So his idea was that he was setting an example that most people would not be able to live up to. But if they tried to implement some of his ideas, then at least their lives are going to be better.
Right. Yeah. So he's the extreme version, and not many are going to live that way exactly. But if you try, you'll be better off than you had been if you hadn't tried. And I did find a thing that said on his character when they asked, "Why do they call you a dog?" And he says, "I fawn on those who give me anything." So, if you give him a sandwich, he's happy about that. I yelp at those who refuse, like, you got everything and you won't give me a sandwich. And I set my teeth in rascals. So he was well known for chewing people out, living simply. On one thing I read at one point, I don't have it in front of me here, but he was, let's just say, pleasing himself in the street, and someone called him out and said, "How dare you do that?" And he said something like, "I wish I could relieve hunger just by rubbing my belly."
Right. He was saying that it's perfectly natural to fulfill all our animal needs.
Yeah, and he
So
said,
there's no
"This is
need
an
to be
easy one
ashamed
to
of
meet.
them
I wish I could defeat hunger in a similar fashion."
by rubbing
But
my tummy.
yeah, rub my tummy. Oh, and I'm full. But yeah, an interesting character, one who basically seems to have thrived on messing with notions of normality, of proper behavior, of prim and properness. Like he would not have given a crap about, oh, what do the neighbors think about what I'm doing, right? That is not what he's about. He's about cutting things down to the simplest form possible, kind of shocking people with his behavior to make them think. And
Right. He was using shock to wake them up and jar them into attention so that he could try to teach them.
yeah, that's the strain of kind of, I think of him as like, if you think of Stoicism, he's like the extreme kind of ascetic form that Epictetus seems to really relate to.
Yeah, most folks listening to this podcast probably have an interest in Stoicism. And for those who have been Stoic practitioners for some years, we often take the concept of preferred and dispreferred indifference for granted. And it's important to remember that the concept of indifference was an innovation of Zeno, the founder of our school. To Diogenes and the subsequent Cynics, they only concerned themselves with virtue and vice. Wealth, fame, noble birth, prestige, all led to vice and were seen as morally corruptive by the Cynics. Health does seem to be an exception. Diogenes did consider a healthy and robust body to be important as a vehicle to embody virtue in the world. But that seemed, as far as I could tell, that's the lone exception. Everything else, if you put any importance on it, it's going to corrupt your character ultimately. So it's best to reject it.
I'd say one thing we can take from our studies of Diogenes are, one, build your resilience to judgment of others. If you're sure you're right about something, I'm always worried about people who are so sure they're right that they'll never listen to other people at all, and then they go down a crazy path. But if you are on a virtuous path, you are going to be laughed at occasionally. You are going to be judged, and you need to let that go. Don't worry about it. You don't have to make a show of your philosophy, but you don't have to hide it either. And so that's one thing I would say to take from it. And also, sometimes simplicity is elegant and simplicity is the way to go. It's chasing after all this stuff in life that keeps us busy, keeps us stressed out. And Diogenes figured out that, hey, I can use my hand for a cup. I can sleep in basically what's an oversized jar in the street. I don't need much of anything to live, to keep the body healthy enough to survive and perhaps even thrive. And then I can walk around and talk about philosophy. And that's what he wanted to do. And so he could do all of that without the stresses of house payments and impressing politicians and impressing the neighbors and kissing people's butts. He didn't have any time for that. That was to him a giant waste of life.
Yeah, that's one of the main things that differentiates the Cynics from the Stoics is that the Stoics do not withdraw. Well, the Cynics didn't withdraw from the city, but they kind of withdrew from all social roles and all social conventions. And the Stoics advised their school followers to maintain their social roles and their social connections and to follow some rules of etiquette and decorum in the name of sociability. So that's definitely one thing that we differ from the Cynics about,
Right. Yeah.
along with the indifference. The fact that we're allowed to have money and we're allowed to pursue things as long as it's not
at the
corruptive of
cost
our
of
character.
virtue. Yeah.
Right. You can earn money, but don't earn money by being an assassin or selling drugs or stealing or, by cheating on your taxes to keep more than you're supposed to, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So, an interesting character, not quite fully in line with what Stoicism became, but definitely a heavy influence on the philosophy, and someone that you might resonate with and you might model in some ways, probably within moderation is what I would suggest. But something you can compare yourself to. He's kind of like the ruler, the yardstick you can measure yourself against. There are many who consider him to be almost a sage in some aspects in terms of his simple life and his
Epictetus seemed to think that he was borderline sage.
yeah Epictetus really liked that guy for sure.
He was such a colorful character that they made a lot of interesting art about Diogenes. So you can do a Google image search and take a look at examples of that. For example, in that famous painting, The School of Athens, where all the famous philosophers are painted together, Plato and Aristotle are most prominent in the center.
Yeah.
Well, right at their feet, just kind of sitting by himself, not really engaging with anybody else in the painting, but in the middle is Diogenes. Unfortunately, in this painting, Stoics kind of get a bum rap because Zeno is off to the far left behind a whole bunch of other stuff, and you just kind of see part of his face, and that's just downright disrespectful.
Poor Zeno.
Yeah, it's a painting by Raphael. It's a wonderful one.
Last thing I thought was kind of interesting was the two accounts of how he died that I saw. One was that he ate a raw octopus and then died. And the other one was that he just decided it was time to die and held his breath until he died, which I'm not sure if that's even possible. But because once you're unconscious, you start breathing again. But I guess if you have the willpower of Diogenes, you can hold your breath and pass out until you're dead.
Well, one thing to remember was he was 90.
That's true.
And his followers found him one morning, and he had his cape pulled up over his head like he was sleeping, but he wasn't giving any sign or moving. And they were like, it's usually past the time where he wakes up. So they moved the cape aside and he was dead. And they decided, he must have died by holding his breath.
Of course.
Which, who knows what they might have been thinking at the time, but any modern person would not be looking for any mystery as to why a 90-year-old died during his sleep.
Right. Like, well, he had a good run. So
he did have a good run.
Yeah, he did.
90 years of raising heck.
That's right. So, get out there, live your philosophy, and keep that lamp burning. Keep looking for an honest man. And don't forget to seize the day.
Carpe diem.